What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are working on the manual transmission for the Subaru BRZ K24 engine swap. Specifically, we're going to be converting over to this SerialNine multi-position shifter relocator. I'm going to show you how to do the installation, so let's jump into it. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to do was get this thing cleaned up a bit. It was pretty grimy, and so I went through with some engine degreaser, a wire brush, as well as a wire wheel on my cordless drill. And so basically all I was really trying to do was just get this thing cleaned up a bit. Obviously you can see that I went a little bit heavy in some spots and actually cleaned off some of the paint here. So I'm going to come back through and paint this afterwards. But just to sort of, try to prevent any rust buildup, obviously there are still some spots that I need to work on a little bit, but I just wanted to get it a little bit clean so we can start this work. So the way that the stock shifter mount works is pretty simple. Your shifter is going to be able to get you into all of your different gears. You have your selector shaft that actually feeds into the transmission. And so if you start here, go left and forward, you've got first, come straight back, you got second, in the middle, up is third, middle back is fourth, to the right and up is fifth, and right and back is sixth. Now for the reverse, it's actually a press down all the way past the sixth gear position and back. And that's going to get you into reverse. Now the reason that we are going to be changing over from this guy to this SerialNine multi-position shifter relocator is that this transmission is not identical to the stock one. This is a 6-speed CD009 out of a 350Z. Now, because of the fact that the length of the transmission body and the length of this shifter bracket are not going to line up with our stock shifter position, that is why we're going to be going to this piece right here. It's this really nice, you've got this big billet aluminum block on top, and I'll show you how this actually enables you to change the position of the shifter in just a minute. But let's go ahead and jump into the installation process. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is obviously get this old rusty bucket of bolts pulled out of here. And that's pretty simple. It's only 4 bolts. You've got one down here, one on top, and then the same for the other side. So you have 2 on top and then 2 on either position. And I believe these are 12mm bolts, so let's go ahead and get those pulled off. And so now that we have these 4 main bolts off, and this guy is pretty loose, we actually want to try and disconnect the shifter handle from the selector shaft linkage. And so we're going to do that by removing, if I can show it, there is another 12mm bolt. It's a little bit too bright for my camera to be able to pick it up here. There's another 12mm bolt right here that we're just going to remove. It'll pull out and I can separate the actual shifter itself from the linkage. All right, so now that's done, this should be able to separate out, yeah. I put a couple of those back in just to sort of hold it in place while I was getting that removed. So now this whole piece just comes right off. It's pretty straightforward there. So this next bit's a little bit tricky, so I've zoomed it in here. On this selector shaft, you can see that there are 2 little sort of retaining pins inside of this shaft here. And so in order to get those out, you're going to need a 1/8 pin punch as well as a 3/16 pin punch and your favorite hammer. We're going to take the 1/8 pin punch. We're just going to line this up right on here to the center of the smaller retaining pin. I'm just going to give this thing a nice good whack. Pull that out. That guy's not quite out of there. And so this is what you're looking at. You can see that it kind of has a ridge on one side, if the camera wants to focus here. Yeah, so you can see that it has a ridge. And so all I did was take these vice grips, compress, basically just squeezing this together to try and get those 2 little pieces a little bit closer together. So now that we have the small one out, we can take our 3/16 punch, set it right in the center and hammer it out. And it goes flying all the way across my garage. Awesome. Fortunately, I don't really need that. So now this guy should pretty much be able to just pull free from the selector shaft. This is an old transmission. It has been sitting quite a while. So we might have to get a little creative with this. Okay, so now that we've got the old shifter off, we've got the transmission cleaned up a little bit, next thing that we're gonna do is basically pre-install the new tension pin into our new gear selector. So this is basically going to go onto the front of that connector shaft, and then this guy is gonna go in through this hole, just pretty much exactly like the other two that we punched out earlier. So what I'm gonna do, just sort of for ease of installation, is I'm actually going to go ahead and pre-compress this pin here with some vice grips, and I'm just gonna hammer this in just enough until the point where it sticks. You don't want this to be protruding into the center of this, otherwise you won't be able to slide this onto that selector shaft. So let's see if we can get this squeezed and hammered in. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a pair of needle nose vice grips, and all I'm really trying to do is to compress the gap in this pin just to the point where it squeezes in enough so that I can slip it into here, because it is obviously going to be a tight fit. That's kind of the whole point. So I'm basically just gonna take this guy. Yes, I'm just trying to get right in the middle. That might be enough. We'll find out as we kind of try to tap this in. Now this is much easier with a vise and you know, a set of like fitting blocks so that this guy can slide right in there and hold it. I don't have one of those, so we'll see. I'm just gonna try and figure out a way to get this hammered in, and we'll see what happens. Well, I just realized I wasn't recording what I was doing, but I wasn't able to get it done over on the workbench with nothing holding it. So basically I took the slide-on sort of positioner piece, and I stuck this little knob down on the end, down into one of the holes in my welding table. So it's got these all little positioner holes. So I had this set down in here, and I had one of these sort of rotating style friction clamps on top, wedged it down so that it couldn't move, and then I hammered it in. Let's see how carefully I can remove these vice grips, and we'll move on. So now that you've got your retaining pin in the collar, one of the things that you can do to check if you can't like physically see whether this is inserted too far or not is when you go to put it on, you won't actually be able to slide this guy on and move it around freely. So that is one of the checks that you can do. And so now all we're gonna do really is line up this pin with this hole on the selector shaft. And then we're just gonna hammer it in. And so you can see now that is not completely flush, but it is pretty much even on both sides. And that's what you're going for. So now this guy can do all of your shifting. The kit comes with 4 fresh bolts. The 2 short ones are going to go on the sides with the shifter, and the 2 long ones, these guys here, will go on the top. So I put these in here just to keep track of them. So let's get these guys out of there. The actual adapter itself has this little piece on the bottom with a hole in the center. So what you're gonna try and do is sneak this stud on the end of this into the top side here, down through the top of your actual sort of base plate for this shifter. So I'm gonna try and work this around each side. Now we're going to take our 2 short bolts, put one in each side. For the 2 bolts up top, the set comes with a couple of different types of spacers. If you have an early CD009 from like a 2003 or 2004 350, then you're going to use these spacers right here that have this step up, this kind of nub here, because of the fact that the transmission housing actually had a recess cut out, and so these guys would slip right down into there. But if you're like me and you have a somewhat newer 350Z, I believe 2005 and newer, then you'll just use the standard spacers like this one. So these guys don't have that extra kind of recessed top. Yeah, I'm just gonna slide this one into place, use the long bolts for the top, put that in, and what you're gonna do is torque these down to 15 foot-pounds on all 4 of these bolts. This is an aluminum transmission case, so it is possible, it is relatively easy to strip these things out. So torque these down 15 foot-pounds, and you're good to go. And here you go, your shifter assembly is pretty much done. You can tell from where this position was compared to the old one. The old shifter was like way back here. So we're cutting off about, I don't know, what's that, about 4 inches? And because this is modular, its adjustability comes from the actual position of the shifter itself. It comes with this piece, which has 3 holes in it. And the idea is that the holes in this will fit over the top of the shifter linkage as well into the actual shifter handle itself. And so if you go the longest distance away, if you go the furthest hole to the actual linkage to the shifter handle itself, you'll get the longest far back distance. But if you need it to be farther forward, you can do the longest this way instead of that way. And so that's probably 4 to 5 inches of total difference depending on your setup and what you actually need it for. Now, if you don't need it to be that far away, that's why it has the center hole. So you can either put the center hole on the linkage and put this one back, and so that's only maybe, 3/4 to an inch of distance versus maybe 1.5 inches or so. Now, the assembly for this is relatively simple. It's basically just an M6 hex bolt for both of these. You loosen them up, you get it put onto the top, and then you put your shifter handle in there, and then you just tighten these down and it friction holds that in place. Now, I am not going to be doing that today because of the fact that I still need to get this underneath the car, and if I had this whole big shifter handle sticking up, I'm imagining it would probably be impossible to actually get this transmission to go all the way under. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it just like this, and once I get the transmission in place, I'll go inside the car. I've already removed the center console because I had to do that when I removed the stock transmission. I'll go in and basically figure out which of these positions is going to be most ideal. So now the last thing that you're going to need to do is check that this top plate is in the proper position. Now, what this can affect is how easy or difficult it is to get into the reverse lockout gate. So if you go to the right and forward, you've got 5th gear, but I'm having some difficulty getting up into that. So if I go right and down, I can get into 6th, and then if I press straight down into the shifter, more or less, if I push down and try to go over and get all the way back here, that should be reverse. However, I'm having a lot of difficulty getting up into 5th. I can't really push that forward there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up these 3 bolts that hold on this top plate. And so now you can see how this top plate will shift slightly back and forth, left to right. And so what you're going to want to do is take the shifter, go from neutral over up into 5th, and then you're going to take this plate and shift it as far to this left side against the shifter as you possibly can. I'm going to take all of these bolts and kind of start to snug them back up. I'm going to take a soft mallet here and just make sure that this is shifted as far to that left side as I can get it. Now I'm going to take this and go from 5th back into 6th. I'm going to give this another little tap, make sure that's as far over there as it'll go. And then we're going to continue to tighten these down. And so now we're basically just going to test to see how well we're getting into each of these gears. So we're going to go 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, over And forward should be 5th gear. Yep, there we go. And then back down to 6th. And then if we press down, pushing downward, and go all the way to the right, and then drop it back, that should be reverse. Good to go. And that's gonna wrap it up for this one, guys. I hope you found it helpful, and if you enjoyed the video, then make sure to give it a thumbs up down below, subscribe to the channel so you can see more engine swap content, and until next time, build your dreams.